On Christmas Eve, right as I sat down for dinner, my father looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're a burden. You need to move out." After years of paying every bill in that house, water heat, even the Amazon Prime, they tossed me like I was nothing. "Hi, I'm Celeste. I was the invisible backbone of my family until I finally let go. I didn't scream. I didn't argue. I just quietly cut off every financial lifeline, one click at a time." And what happened next? It exposed everything they tried to hide. What would you have done if your own parents treated you like an expense? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever walked away from family to save yourself? The hallway smelled like reheated ham and faded pine. I shrugged off my coat, damp from the air outside, and hung it on the same hook that's been crooked since I was 15. The living room blinked in lazy colours, red-green, one blue light that had long since given up, but they didn't make anything feel festive. They just reminded me how old everything was, how unchanged. The heating unit buzzed with effort, barely holding back the chill that crept up from the floors. I rubbed my hands together, stepped into the kitchen and found Mum placing a plate of microwave-warmed ham at the centre of the table. She looked up startled, as if I had intruded. "Dinner's almost ready," she said with that tight smile she wore more often these days, like it had been stitched to her face too long ago. Dad sat at the head of the table, swirling a half glass of boxed red wine. He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the overhead light like he expected it to flicker out any second, and maybe he welcomed the dark. Ezra was already in his seat, hunched forward, the glow of his phone reflecting off his cheek. He put it away quickly when I stepped in, tried to meet my eyes. I gave him a small smile and walked to my usual place. The table was silent except for the rustle of paper napkins and the quiet scrape of silverware as we each filled our plates. Instant mashed potatoes, the kind that always clumped near the edges. A pale cranberry jelly ring still shaped like the can it came in. I spooned some onto my plate. Mum poured herself a glass of water and sat down without a word. The silence didn't surprise me. It was the same script we ran every year, no carols playing in the background. No stories, just the clinking of forks against chipped porcelain and the hum of appliances that hadn't been replaced since Bush was president. I glanced at Dad. He hadn't touched his food, still watching the lights, still drinking. Then he said it, "You're a burden, Celeste. You need to move out." Just like that, as if he'd said, "Pass the rolls." No warning, no build-up. Just those words, sharp, flat, final. I blinked. Ezra froze fork mid-air. Mum let out a laugh, short, high-pitched, wrong. "Oh, Frank," she said, but her voice trailed off like it didn't know where to go next. Dad didn't blink. "I mean it. You've stayed here long enough." I looked down at my plate. The potatoes had already cooled. "I'm not here because I need shelter," I said, my voice steady. "I pay for the utilities, the food, that wine you're drinking." He snorted. "Doesn't matter. It's my house." I said, "It's time." Mum looked at him, then back at her lap. Ezra stared at me, his mouth slightly open. The same Ezra I helped through geometry, paid for school supplies, kept fed when they couldn't. I stood up slowly, pulled my napkin off my lap, folded it neatly beside my plate. "All right," I said. Dad leaned back in his chair like he'd won something, like he'd been waiting to play that card for years. I didn't yell, didn't slam anything. I walked past Mum, who still hadn't looked me in the eye, and gently placed my unfinished plate in the sink. The faucet dripped once, then again. Ezra rose from his chair as I headed for the stairs, but I shook my head just slightly. He sat back down his fork, untouched. The hallway creaked under my steps. I passed the peeling family photo in the stairwell, Mum smiling like she meant it. Dad, with one hand stiffly on Ezra's shoulder, me in the corner holding a diploma. No one came to the ceremony, for in my room, the air was cooler. My old blanket was still on the bed, folded the way I always left it after a long shift. I reached under the bed and pulled out the folder I'd labelled Emergency Plan 6 months ago. Not because I expected this day, but because I stopped trusting it wouldn't come. I opened the closet and began folding my clothes. Slowly, deliberately, the room was quiet except for the faint static of the heating pipe below and the soft sound of fabric stacking. Every shirt, every notebook, every scarf I bought with overtime money, I packed them all. No rush, no drama. This room once held all the pieces of me, the awards I earned, the books I clung to, the quiet late nights where I cried into a pillow and still woke up on time. But tonight, it wasn't mine anymore. It was just a holding space for someone they never really saw. I reached for my last hoodie, folded it neatly, and placed it in the suitcase. Then I heard it. A soft knock, not from downstairs, from just outside the door. "Celeste," Ezra's voice was barely a breath. I didn't respond. Did you pack already?" His voice cracked a little. "Are you really leaving?" I opened the door and looked at him. His eyes were red, his hands clenched at his sides like he was holding back a flood. "I'm doing what they asked," I said. My voice came out gentler than I expected. He didn't reply. I could have told him a dozen things, how this wasn't his fault, how he still had time, how I'd always be a phone call away. But none of those things would change the fact that the only warmth in this house came from people like us. And now they were telling the fire to leave. I didn't say goodbye, not when I zipped my suitcase, not when I stepped through the front door, not even when the cold air hit me like a breath I hadn't taken in years. No one followed me, no one asked where I was going. The lights in the living room were still on, flickering quietly under cheap garland. They didn't flicker for me. The street outside was silent except for the occasional hum of tires over frozen asphalt. I loaded my suitcase into the trunk and turned the ignition. The engine made a reluctant sound before settling. I pulled away slowly, watching the house shrink in the rearview mirror until it disappeared behind bare trees and frostbitten mailboxes. Shannon's apartment was just a 10-minute drive away, but it felt like crossing into another life. She lived in a modest walk-up just off Larch Avenue, brick walls, iron railings, a single porch light glowing faintly like a beacon in someone else's storm. I buzzed her unit, and before I could even say my name, the door clicked open. She was waiting at the top of the stairs, wrapped in an old sweatshirt and fuzzy socks, hair tied up in a knot like she'd fallen asleep reading again. Her eyes scanned me not with curiosity, just quiet recognition. "You can take the couch," she said softly. "Blankets clean, teas warm." That was all. No questions, no need for them. Inside, the air smelled like peppermint and toasted bread. A single lamp lit the corner of the living room where a folded quilt sat on the cushions. I took off my shoes, unwrapped my scarf, and stood in the middle of the room for a moment longer than I meant to. "Bathroom's down the hall," she added, her voice already fading toward her bedroom. I sat on the edge of the couch, exhaled, and let my fingers trace the rim of the ceramic mug she'd left out, steam rising slow and steady. It was peppermint. Of course it was. After a few sips, I pulled out my laptop from the side pocket of my bag. My hands moved on muscle memory passwords, login security questions. No hesitation. I'd rehearsed this moment before late at night in my head between emails and budget spreadsheets at the office. The bank dashboard loaded slowly. A snowy banner wished me happy holidays, but the red transaction alerts below felt more honest. I went straight to the accounts tab. Heart Steady Electric, autopay on internet, autopay on water, autopay on streaming services. Autopay on Mum's secondary credit card active. One by one, I clicked edit, unlink card, confirm. A pop-up appeared. "Are you sure you want to remove this payment method?" Yes. No second guessing. It wasn't revenge. It was return. Return of control of breath of what was mine to begin with. The mouse hovered over the last one electric utility. My thumb rested on the touchpad, unmoving. I thought of Ezra probably lying awake in his room, trying to guess what tomorrow would look like. I thought of Dad downstairs sipping wine he didn't buy, heated by power he didn't pay for. I clicked. A subtle ping confirmed the change. The word off turned grey. I closed the browser and leaned back into the cushions. The peppermint had cooled, but I sipped it anyway. Outside, the wind rattled something metallic on the fire escape. My phone vibrated. Ezra. "Are you safe?" I smiled. "Me, yes, warm too." A few minutes later, another vibration. "Mum, TV won't turn on. Did you change something?" No greeting, no concern, just surprised that the world wasn't functioning on default anymore. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The apartment grew still. I placed the empty mug on the coaster beside me, slipped under the blanket, and stared at the ceiling fan circling slowly above me. The walls hummed faintly with the heating system. The warmth here was soft-earned. Somewhere far down the road, a house was cooling inch by inch, and not just because of winter. An hour passed, maybe 2. My phone lit up again. "Ezra, power's out. Dad's losing it. What did you do?" I stared at the message thumbs resting on the keyboard. The words didn't sting. They settled. The first alert came at 6:42 a.m., a flagged login attempt from an unrecognized device. I was brushing my teeth in Shannon's bathroom, steam curling over the mirror, when my phone buzzed on the counter. I wiped my hands, picked it up, and stared at the screen. "Your Chase account may be at risk. Please verify." I knew immediately. By the time I finished dressing, there were 2 more. One for Amazon, one for the electric portal, all blocked, no access granted, no password, reset. The plan had worked. Still, I sat down at the kitchen table, opened my laptop, and changed everything again. New passwords, 2-factor authentication for every login, every device previously allowed revoked. Even Lorraine's tablet, which I once linked to the Wi-Fi as a favour so she could stream holiday movies last year. I added biometrics where I could link everything to my fingerprint, my voice. Across the table, Shannon was folding laundry. One of her socks dropped to the floor, and she didn't even flinch when I cursed under my breath. She looked up briefly. "More of their nonsense." I nodded. She didn't ask more than that. Just handed me a warm towel from the basket and said, "Don't let them back in, digitally or otherwise." I smiled, but only halfway. Then I got up and made us both tea. The world at Shannon's moved with quiet rhythm. Dishes dried on racks. A yellow notepad sat on the counter with a grocery list we both added to throughout the week. Her cat Noodles slept by the radiator like a tiny lion with no kingdom to guard. For the first time in years, nothing demanded my attention. The second I blinked, except my phone. Voicemail. "Mum. Joanna, please. We don't know what happened. The lights won't come on. Your father is upset. Just tell us if you're okay." Mum. "The internet's still out. Did you cancel something?" Voicemail. "Mum. I can't get your dad to calm down. He says you've betrayed the family. Please call me." The messages came in waves and I let them wash over me. I didn't listen to all of them. Just enough to know they hadn't changed, only panicked because their comfort was unraveling. That night, Shannon made lentil stew. It was too salty and neither of us said anything. We sat across from each other, the air warm from the stove, a soft playlist humming from her speaker. My phone buzzed again. I ignored it. Shannon raised an eyebrow. "You good?" I nodded. "Just more of them." She pushed a bowl toward me. "Eat before it gets cold." I did. Bite by bite, I let the tension leave my shoulders. For a moment, it almost felt like peace. But peace doesn't knock, it pounds. A loud, uneven banging rattled the doorframe. Shannon stood quickly, spoon clattering in her bowl. I froze, eyes locked on the door. The pounding came again, louder, urgent, full of something that hadn't just broken. It had been waiting to. Shannon whispered, "Should I know?" I said, already rising, "I'll look." I crept toward the door, heart thudding. The hallway was quiet except for the echoes of fists against wood. I peeked through the peephole. It was Frank. His face was red, his hair disheveled. He was pounding with the side of his fist, shouting something I couldn't hear fully. I stepped back slowly, breath held tight in my chest. Shannon looked terrified. "Is that—" I nodded. "Yes. What is he doing here?" I reached for my phone on the counter. "This is why you change your locks," I said softly. Then I tapped the screen, hit the emergency icon, and dialed 911. "What's your emergency?" "My father is outside my apartment. He's shouting and trying to force his way in. I do not feel safe." Is he armed? No, just angry. Are you alone? No, I'm with a friend. Officers are en route. Do not open the door. I nodded as if the dispatcher could see me. Shannon hovered behind me, hand clenched around a ceramic spoon like it might do something. The banging continued. Frank's voice was louder now. You think you're better than us, Celeste? You think walking away makes you strong? You owe this family. I didn't reply. I didn't move. I just watched the door, felt every vibration of his voice in my ribs. A few seconds later, the banging stopped. Sirens swelled in the distance. Shannon exhaled. Do you want me to talk to them? No, I said. This time I'll speak for myself. He was still yelling, even through the thick wooden door. His voice punched the air like it always did, angry rising, then curling into itself like a storm that didn't know where to land. Except this time, I didn't meet it. I didn't flinch or lean forward. I stood still just a few feet away, holding the phone to my ear. Mom, can you confirm your address one more time? The dispatcher asked. I did calmly. My voice didn't shake. And you said it's your father outside? Yes. His name is Frank Monroe. He's yelling, trying to force his way in. Behind me, Shannon stood by the hallway wall, one hand braced on the deadbolt, like she could will it to stay strong. Her face was pale and she looked at me like she was waiting for the part where I'd fall apart, but I didn't. He's unarmed, I added, but he's unstable. All right, the dispatcher said. Units are on the way. Please stay on the line. I didn't answer. I just stared at the door. Come, Celeste! Frank's voice barked from the other side. You think this makes you better? You think cutting us off makes you right? He pounded the door again, a heavy open-handed thud that rattled the hinges. But not me. You owe this family after everything we gave you. I stepped a little closer, not out of fear, but something else. Something like clarity. All those years he used that tone from across the room, over dinner, through walls. He didn't need to raise his hand. He had learned to raise his voice and let silence do the bruising. But not tonight. Tonight I stayed behind the lock. I took care of everything, he shouted. You lived under my roof. That was the part he couldn't let go of. The idea that his roof, his name, his title of father, those things were currency he could keep collecting on no matter how much I paid. Shannon moved toward me slowly, touching my shoulder. You did the right thing, she whispered. I nodded. You always do, she added more quietly. The sirens came faint at first, then louder. A rush of red and blue filled the stairwell windows. Frank kept yelling, not hearing it or maybe refusing to. I could see a shadow move through the peephole, still pacing, still muttering. Then finally the knock came. This one was softer steady. Police, open up. I unlocked the deadbolt, stepped back and let the officers in. There were two of them, one young and one older. Professional, not harsh. They nodded as they entered, assessed the room quickly, and then stepped toward the hallway. Sir, you need to back away from the door, the older officer said firmly. This is my daughter's apartment. I have the right to speak to her. Not like this, the younger one said. You've been reported for harassment and attempted forced entry. Please step back. I watched through the crack in the door. Frank turned toward them, eyes bloodshot, mouth twisted in a sneer I hadn't seen in years but recognized instantly. She's my daughter, he repeated louder. You don't get to force your way into my life anymore, I said. I didn't mean to speak, but the words came through the door like they'd been waiting behind my ribs for years. He froze. The officers moved closer. Sir, step away from the apartment. Now he didn't. I raised her. I paid for everything when she was a kid. She's an adult. This is trespassing. That word trespassing was a boundary made real, something I had never been allowed to claim. But now it wasn't just mine. It had law. It had a voice besides mine. Frank lunged not toward me, but toward the hallway like he was going to argue his way through a wall. The officers grabbed him quickly, handcuffed him, and began reading his rights as they walked him toward the stairwell. You'll regret this, Celeste, he shouted over his shoulder. You'll regret turning your back on blood. I didn't reply, didn't move, just listened to his voice get smaller with each step away. When the door finally closed again, Shannon locked it with a click. A quiet final sound. She turned to me slowly. "You okay?" I wanted to say yes, but instead I sat down on the couch, stared at the blanket I had folded that morning, and nodded once. The silence that followed wasn't peace, not yet. But it wasn't fear either. It was the space between those two things, the breath before healing. 3 days later, I was pouring coffee in Shannon's kitchen when my phone lit up. "Ezra, your car is in the driveway. Mum's using it." I stared at the message fingers wrapped tight around the mug, and I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to consider. They still had pieces of me. The house looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe just emptier. Paint peeled at the edges of the doorframe, and a broken porch light dangled on a wire like it had given up halfway through the winter. The officer beside me said nothing as I knocked once, then pushed the door open. Ezra had already unlocked it. He stood at the top of the stairs, arms folded tightly across his chest, face unreadable. Lorraine sat on the couch, arms crossed, legs tucked under her, like she was trying to fold into herself. The TV was gone, so were the throw pillows. A stack of unopened mail sat slumped on the entryway table next to a cup, with my name on it, once mine, now faded and chipped. I didn't speak, I just walked in. The officer followed 2 steps behind me, clipboard in hand, but not intervening. My old bedroom door creaked the same way when I opened it. That long, dragging sound like the room was sighing. But the space beyond didn't welcome me. My comforter was gone. The shelves were bare. A few hangers clanged softly in the closet. My laptop wasn't there. Neither were the journals I'd kept in the nightstand drawer. I walked back down the stairs and crossed the living room without looking at Lorraine. "My car," I said. "It's parked outside." She nodded carefully, casual. "It's been useful. We needed groceries." I stepped outside and opened the driver's side door. The air inside was stale, faintly sweet, like gas station car freshener and weak old cereal. On the passenger seat, a grocery store receipt printed 2 days ago. Name on the loyalty card, Mireya Monroe. I opened the center console. Her gloves, a half-empty pack of gum I never liked. My spare charger was gone. She'd been driving it like it was hers. I turned back to the door. Lorraine stood on the porch now, arms crossed. "You weren't using it," she said too lightly. "You left and we needed things your father's medicine." "Don't," I cut in quietly. "You didn't ask. You didn't even tell me." She frowned. "You're really going to make a scene over a car?" I didn't respond. I pulled out my phone, opened the GPS log app, pulled up a screenshot of the car's movements, downtown Akran, 2 grocery stores, a post office I'd never visited. Then I pulled out a printed bank statement. There were gas charges on the card I'd unlinked. I said, not raising my voice, "And the laptop, where is it?" She looked away. "I needed the money," she said. "The heater broke again. And your father, we had expenses. You sold it." She looked at me, then not defensive now, but pitiful. "I gave birth to you, Celeste. Don't forget that." I nodded. "And you've spent every year since trying to take things back." She opened her mouth, then shut it. "I'm filing a report," I continued, "for theft for unauthorized use of my vehicle. This isn't an argument, I'm just telling you." Ezra was still on the stairs. He hadn't moved. His eyes flicked from me to her back again. When our eyes met, he didn't nod. He didn't shake his head. He just watched. Lorraine's voice cracked slightly. "You're hurting your own mother." I held her gaze. "No," I said. "You stopped being my mother the moment you sold my life without asking." She stepped back like I'd slapped her, but I hadn't raised a hand, just a truth she didn't want to carry. The officer took a step forward, neutral but present. "Mom," he said to me, "if you'd like, we can collect your remaining belongings now. I'll document anything that appears missing or misused." I nodded. "There's not much left." Back in the room, I packed what I could find, some books I'd hidden behind the radiator, a few photos Ezra must have tucked in the drawer, the sweater I'd left on the hook behind the door. When I zipped the bag shut, the room looked like it had never been mine. I walked out without a backward glance. The officer walked me to my car. I drove off without the radio on hand, steady on the wheel, breath slow. Akron streets were still crusted with snow slush piling up at the corners. My phone buzzed twice in the glove box before I finally checked it later that night. The first was from Ezra. "Did you file the report?" I typed back. "Yes, I had to." He didn't reply, not right away. The second message came from an unknown number. "You think you've won Blood is Blood. You'll see." I read it twice. Then I turned off my phone because I didn't need to see. I'd already seen enough. The first morning in my new apartment, I opened the windows just to hear the city hum. Birds argued somewhere on the rooftop. Someone in the building across the alley was practicing trumpet off-key but earnest. Sunlight spilled onto the hardwood floor in a long, lazy stripe. It was April 2024. I hadn't seen my parents in over a year. The walls here were blank when I moved in, not bare, just full of potential. On the second day, I hung up a photo of me and Ezra from a road trip when he was 10. He had chocolate on his face and I had braces. We were laughing in that picture, really laughing. I hadn't realized how rare that was until I framed it. Ivy Tran, my new roommate, had signed the lease with me. We'd met through work. She asked good questions, paid on time, and always left one light on for warmth when she got home late. She never asked about my family. Just handed me a slice of peach pie the first weekend and said, "This place feels like a beginning." I believed her. That spring I signed up for a community art class, something I'd put off for years. I didn't tell anyone, just walked in with my sketchbook and let my hands remember how to move for no one else's expectations. It felt strange at first to make something with no outcome, no paycheck, just joy. At work I got promoted, a small raise, a better desk. People started asking for my opinion in meetings, and through it all Ezra stayed in touch carefully, quietly. His messages were short but steady. Got through midterms. They fought again last night. Only 5 more months. Then one morning in early September, a new one. I'm ready. That was all. I picked him up the next day. He was waiting on the front step, a black backpack at his feet and a small suitcase beside him. His hair was longer, a little messy, but his eyes were steady. We didn't talk much on the drive. I helped him move into the dorm at the same community college I'd once attended. We unpacked his books, laid out his pillow, and stuck a small clip-on lamp to the edge of the desk. "That's all you brought?" I asked, looking at the bag. He shrugged. The rest wasn't worth keeping. Afterward, we had noodles at a tiny diner a few blocks away. It smelled like sesame oil and green onion. The waitress called everyone sweetheart and wore 2 different earrings like it was on purpose. We ate in mostly silence. Ezra slurped his noodles' eyes, watching the steam rise. I watched his shoulders relax, inch by inch, like a knot loosening. Later that evening, we walked by the river. The trees were starting to turn flecks of orange, catching the breeze. The air was crisp, the kind that reminds you how good it feels to breathe in deep without flinching. Ezra stopped by a bench and sat down slowly, like he wasn't sure if sitting meant staying. "I didn't know life could feel light," he said. I sat beside him, let the moment stretch. "That's what happens," I said, "when no one's holding you down." We didn't talk after that. We just watched the river move. No more alerts from the bank, no unknown numbers. No mailed letters from people who had my name, but none of my care. Ivy had texted earlier, "Dinner's on me tonight. Don't argue." I didn't plan to. The sun dipped lower behind the buildings. Ezra leaned back and closed his eyes. And I felt something shift. Not a snap, not a break, just space. Room. Enough quiet to stretch out and call my own. No victory, no vengeance, just peace. And for the first time in years, I knew I didn't have to earn it anymore. Somewhere between unpacking Ezra's suitcase and watching the river ripple under an orange sky, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. The silence around us didn't feel like punishment. It felt earned, like peace was something you could build one honest boundary at a time. I used to think walking away meant giving up, but sometimes it's how you begin again with clearer eyes and a steadier heart. Family isn't just blood. It's who protects your peace, who sees your worth without needing you to prove it. If we teach each other anything, let it be this: no one should have to break just to belong, and love when real never demands that you sacrifice your voice to keep it. In a world that often glorifies endurance, choosing yourself is a quiet kind of bravery. If this story reminded you of your own journey or someone else's, feel free to share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear what family means to you.